So after reading the first assigned reading and watching the Why Go Into Hiding video, you should have a pretty good understanding of what led the family to hide in the annex and how their first few weeks in the annex have gone. Now remember, Anne got that diary for her 13th birthday as a gift. So the diary is very important to her, which might show us one of the reasons of why she spends so much time reading in that diary. But we also learned through reading about what life was like in the annex that Anne needed an outlet. Remember that life in the annex was very cramped and isolating. There was a lot of tension going on in the annex, and Anne needed somewhere to sort of vent that tension, and that's where her diary came in. There was all sorts of conflicts and tensions that were present in the annex. First, there's the big looming idea of this war going on right outside, and that fear that they could be caught at any moment. And what would happen to them when they were caught? Well, the family wasn't really sure at that time. What we know will happen to them when they get caught is that they will be taken to concentration camps where ultimately many of them will die. They didn't know what fate arrived outside of those walls, but that could almost be more terrifying than really knowing what would happen. And that's something that Anne writes a lot about in the book. They did have one window where they could get a little bit of fresh air inside the annex, but that really wasn't enough. Anne writes a lot about how the family spends time dreaming about what life was like outside the annex. They had no fresh air, they couldn't feel the fresh warm sun on their skin, and living in these conditions was really terrifying and frightening for them. But this idea of not knowing what would happen once they were caught was also very terrifying for them. Another big thing in talking about the cramped living style that these families shared was that these 8 people also had to cook meals together and figure out what they were going to eat. Now remember, they couldn't just get up and leave and go to the grocery store like we can today. They couldn't have Domino's delivered pizza. So they were very, very dependent on the Van Dussels to supply them with food. So while they had stockpiled some food previously in preparation for in case they did have to go into hiding, it certainly wasn't enough to last them the 2-year span that they spent there in the attic. So they had very few options. The food that they did get was, not necessarily something they can choose, and it wasn't that they all got to have their favorite food. So things like cake and desserts and, those fatty foods were very, very, very rare. In fact, they even contemplated getting rid of the pet cat because of how little food it was taking, but it was still food that the families could have shared amongst themselves. So this struggle of food is something that you'll hear a lot throughout the book. And I'm sure that you can all imagine if you were stuck in an attic and just forced to eat the same, potatoes and vegetables and very, very little meat every day, day in and day out. You'd probably be dreaming of a big cheeseburger from McDonald's or a big ice cream cone too. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. What I want you to do now is look at the video that I've created as a screencast that's an interactive tour of the annex that Anne Frank and her family were hiding in. This can give you a good idea about what their actual living quarters was like, and it can also help you to see some of the similarities and differences that you might have to Anne's life. So take a minute. That tour is about 3.5, 4 minutes long. Go ahead and view that before you jump into your next reading, and then I'll catch up with you after that.